Welcome, welcome everybody once again. Thank you for joining our conversation today. Welcome to our friends as well who are watching us from Facebook. You will bear with us from Facebook because our primary audience is the one here on Zoom. There are still some people joining, but they will get us on the way. So today marks our first webinar about an Africanism Christianity discourse. Basically, will be a series of webinars where we create a conversation around the intersection of Christianity and Africans. So we are starting with some historical accounts just to give us a sense of where it all began and comes from. So today basically is just a teaser just to introduce the webinars that will be happening once a month. So we'll have the next one in June, late June. So today the title of the sermon is Ntsikana Gabha meets an African meets God. Our primary speaker, who was going to lay the foundation for the discussion, unfortunately cannot join us, which is Brother Mambi. But Bishop is here with us, so I will just lay the foundation before Bishop comes in. And then I'd just like to acknowledge everyone who is joining us from all over the world. I know some people are not primarily based in South Africa. They are based in other parts of the continent and the world at large. Please feel welcomed. Before we get into it, I'd just like Bishop to greet and just to say hello to our viewers. And before Bishop comes in, just a few ground rules. Please make sure your mics are muted and your video is turned off so that the transmission, the bandwidth may not be loaded. And then when it's time for questions and answers, you'll get to unmute your mic and activate your video. So let me give over to Bishop Maponga. I don't think he needs an extensive introduction. Some of you know him from Facebook. Some of you know him from the new reality show Abafundisi on DSTV. And then some of you know him from other spaces. So Bishop, can you just please greet our audience? Thanks.
Dumelang, wherever you are in the world, we send you greetings from the southern part of the continent.
Thanks, Bishop. Okay, before we start, just to lay the foundation to the discussion, we first gonna have the question and answer session after Bishop says some stuff to us. There is a function to raise your hand, or you can just on Zoom, or you can just indicate on the chat box if you want to say something. Some of the questions you can write them on the chat box, then I'll read them out for us to discuss. You may have a question, you may have a comment, either way it's fine. And then towards the end of our conversation, we are going to have a short poll that will take like 20 minutes for you to rate the experience, and then we'd welcome feedback from Facebook and the chat section on how we can improve these engagements. So without wasting any time, so we chose the experience of Ntsikana. So Ntsikana is a Xhosa, or was a Xhosa prophet, and his story is quite loaded. So it would be impossible during this time we have together to exhaust it and to deconstruct it and to dissect. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're only going to focus on particular aspects of his life, so that since we are starting, but as we go on with the conversations, maybe we can revisit some aspects of his life. So Ntsikana, he was a Xhosa prophet in the Eastern Cape. But before I get into his life, I would just like to contextualize the time when he was existing and some of the issues, the dynamics around his life. So when you read the early literature, the people who first wrote about Ntsikana, you will notice there are some racist connotations around him and around what Christianity and the missionaries achieved in Southern Africa. So when you read, you get a sense of that bias. So but as time went, that text or the narrative about Ntsikana has taken a different shape, where now there's some critique to how the whole encounter or intersection was being narrated. So there are some contestations on things around dates and some of the issues, but the general narrative is widely accepted about Ntsikana. So also in the early writings, you will notice some spelling errors about the names. They will talk about Ogai, but that refers to Galega. So you get things like that. So, but the general narrative is well accepted. So we are using basically the life and times of Ntsikana, or certain aspects, as a way to enter or to start a conversation about the intersection of Christianity and Africans, or the way God approaches Africans in an African context. So Bishop will help us also to reflect beyond the amaXhosa setting or South Africa, but in Africa worldwide. and maybe some people may share some experiences from wherever you are in the globe. So Ntsikana was born in 1780 and he passed away in 1821. So immediately it means that now we need to transport ourselves actually to the 17 and the 1800s so that we can have a sense of the dynamics then, of the social dynamics that were happening at the time. So just a brief background. At that time, the Xhosa people were living in round houses. They call them huts or rondavel, which had thatched roofs, and they had only one entrance. They were circular in shape. So inside the rondavel, in the middle, you would have a fireplace, and then in the rondavel, the kitchen was here, the sitting room was here, the bedroom was here, everything was here. That was the architecture of the time, and people and women in particular were the ones responsible actually for constructing these structures. Men assisted with the roofing, and please. Okay, sorry, the mics were not muted. So they were living in a such space, and they were wearing animal skins. And with the animal skins, there were levels. So some for the chiefs and the advisors to the chieftaincy, they wore leopard skins, lion skins, and so on. So that was the setting. And then also in the household or in the setting, there would be also a kraal, Ebuhlanti. So amaXhosa at the time, they were mainly pastoralists, and they had cattle, they had sheep, they had goats. So Ebuhlanti plays quite a significant role within the setting there. So Ebuhlanti is where the cattle was kept. It's also where the ancestors were believed to reside. But before you enter Ebuhlanti, so just outside Ebuhlanti, you had what we call the courtyard, which is Inkundla. So in the courtyard, everyone is welcome there. No, it's not the courtyard was an inclusive space, but as you enter into the kraal, it became more of an inclusive and exclusive space. So depending on the occasion, not everyone could enter or had rights to access Ebuhlanti. And then inside Ebuhlanti, at the bottom, you had an area where the ancestors were believed to reside. So Ebuhlanti served many functions. Okay, and so Ntsikana, his mother was okay. Before I talk about his birth, I must acknowledge that there is a context on which his birth happened. So there was a political tension, or there were tensions around the Xhosa nation in that part of the Eastern Cape region. But of course, we will not get into those things in this discussion or in this conversation. Around the Ndlambes, the Ngekas, and so on. There were those some collusions there. And so when Ntsikana is born, there is also a guy or another Xhosa prophet called Ncele, who was a bit older than Ntsikana. But before we get there, so where we want to go is the actual experience at Ebuhlanti of Ntsikana. But one thing to note about amaXhosa before we get there is that the geographical location I'm talking about now is around Eqonce, King Williamstown area, around Pedi, Alice, around those areas. That is the setting of the place. So amaXhosa, they did believe in God at the time, but they referred to him as uQamata or uNkulunkulu, which means the greatest great. That's the direct translation for uNkulunkulu. So, and they believed, they did not practice idol worship. They did not carve images or idols for themselves, but they believed in the spirit of their ancestors, and they thought, or they believed ancestors that they look after them, and that they intercede with uQamata on their behalf. So ancestors played quite a significant role in the social life of the Xhosa African religion. There were also strong beliefs of supernatural powers like witchcraft, and the economy was mainly, they were pastoralist, and they were accustomed to early rising in the mornings. Now, Ntsikana, he grew up, so he was born by his mother. His mother was the second wife to Gabha, which is Ntsikana. And around the time of the birth of Ntsikana, the wife was actually expelled, or in Xhosa we say wagxothwa emzini. There were some tensions around that with the first wife, but Ntsikana was born at his mother's place, so he was not born at his father's place. So he grew up like any other Xhosa boy. He grew up herding sheep and goats, and then he graduated to herding cows. And then at some point he met Van der Kemp, which was a settler that was preaching the gospel amongst amaNgqika. But now to the point of discussion, Ntsikana at an older age, he visits his family kraal, that is Ebuhlanti, where, as he usually does, early in the morning, which was a normal practice amongst amaXhosa. He particularly had a favorite ox of his. He called it Uhulushe. So usually Xhosa patriarchs would go to the kraal for meditation, to admire their cattle and so on. So this morning, Ntsikana is doing the same thing when he notices something strange or unfamiliar, something like a light that is different shining around Uhulushe, and something like a spear piercing his side. So he asked the little boy who was with him there, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" He said, "Did you see that?" So the boy, he said, "No, what are you talking about?" So he said, "Okay, maybe it was not meant for your eyes." So historians record that encounter as the moment when Ntsikane met God Ebuhlanti. It is believed that was when the Holy Spirit actually intersected with Ntsikana Ebuhlanti. Now, amaXhosa, these ones they're called the red oak. Babeqaba imbola. So Ntsikana, after this whole thing, he goes back, and then he's later on troubled by that encounter in the kraal. And then the following day, they are invited to umcimbi, to a ceremony elsewhere. And as the festivities are going on, and he is still troubled by that encounter, he asked his family to accompany him back home. He wanted to leave. And on their way back, they were crossing the river. Then that's where he washed the red oak, which they used to cover their whole body. And it is believed, historians record that account as when Ntsikana was fully assimilating into accepting God or Christianity, as it were. And that's when he was forsaking the Xhosa religion, so so to speak. But for after that, then he started to prophesy, to sing. Initially, people thought he was mad and or takati or bewitched, that something was wrong with him, because he would say, something tells me that we should pray. Then he would sing songs. One of them is the one that we started with. And so Ntsikana was an advisor to Uneka. And then there was also Nxele, who was an advisor to the Ndlambes. So the gospel of Nxele and Ntsikana were in contradiction, because at the time now they were heavy. So Nxele was saying something else, and Ntsikana was saying, no, we should only fear God, and we should not. Nxele is misleading the people. So Nceka one time visits Ntsikana, where when Ntsikana prophesies to him or shares a prophecy with him to say, there will come a people into the land that are unknown. He was referring now to amaMvengu. They are called Fingos in the literature. And then another of his prophecies was that there will come people with a book with the red mouth and a button with no hole. When they come, take the book with the red mouth, and take the coin or the button with no hole, but do not value the button more than the word. If you do that, these people, when he described them, he said they have soft hair, soft silky hair. In Xhosa we say he was referring to white people, and he said, if you value the money, that was the button without the hole, more than the Bible, which was the book with the red mouth, they will overcome you. They will divide the land amongst themselves. They will put roads, fences, and borders, and so on. So that was one of the prophecies that he made. And then another prophecy that I would like to add to the conversation. Nceka left, and then he sent for Nceka again and told him, the servant, to tell Nceka that he saw the heads of the Ncekas being eaten by ants. And this was a warning or a caution or a counsel against going into the 1818 Battle of Amalinda, where the Ncekas were defeated. So some of the aspects that I would like to tease out from this experience is that when God, or when the Holy Spirit approached Ntsikana, it is quite significant that it approached him Ebuhlanti, where Ebuhlanti was actually a crucial part of the Xhosa religion. So when God approaches Ntsikana, he approaches him in a familiar territory where the spiritual beings reside. And also, so the Holy Spirit also introduces itself to Ntsikana in that context. And also to note the language Ntsikana uses to communicate the messages from God, using the Xhosa idioms or proverbs or izaqi namaqhalo to say he saw the ant of the Nqekas being eaten by ants to signify that they were going to die in battle and will be eaten. Their carcasses would be eaten off by ants. Also, another thing to note: if you listened to the song we opened with, it has a different composition, or it plays out differently to what we are used to in our churches. And some of the early recordings, actually, they describe Ntsikana's compositions as they don't have discord, they are all over the place. Those were the European accounts about the hymns of Ntsikana. But also Ntsikana, he would also gather people under. There was a tree, a big tree, where he would gather people, where they would sing and worship. So that we could say was the earliest form of a church, or people congregating for the purpose of praising God and worshiping God, which also gives us something to think about, also about the concept of church, that the structure as we know it today is not actually the gospel, that if it's not a structure, then you are not congregating, or we ought not to be necessarily fixated by the structure. But what we take from here is that if the people are gathered in one place and they are congregating there, then there the church is. So so those are some. So also here what we see is that Ntsikana, so God approaches Ntsikana in his cultural context, in respect of his culture, and when he expresses worship to God and expresses messages from God, he uses his worldview and cultural constructs to convey the messages and to describe God. In essence, it was not required of him to divorce being umXhosa, as it were. So let me stop there now, just as a way of introduction, and then we can, at the time of the Q&A session, then people can add some more to enrich the conversation. But now I will hand over to Bishop just to reflect on this account, and maybe to transport us to other experiences maybe that are similar in the around Africa and in other African cultures. Also, to provoke us into conversation, and to help us to ask some questions about this intersection of God and Africans. Over to you, Bishop. Or let me unmute you.
What? Am I audible enough?
Again,
Hello, testing one.
okay, come again, Bishop. Let me unmute you myself. Okay, I have unmuted you.
Testing 1, 2.
Yes, yes.
Am I audible enough? Greetings to you and all your viewers out there around the world. I see we've got quite a good number of people that are in the house. I see friends from Ghana. I see friends from the US. I also see some faces from East and Southern Africa. The phenomenon that we are in conversation today, every culture in Africa has its own story, and unfortunately these stories have not been captured or written for preservation. The danger we've always faced, particularly the educated community amongst us, it is to go to school to learn how to read and write. And the only thing that we don't do when we're educated, we don't read, we don't write. I say so because we've never translated our skills of reading and writing into creating archives, which then translate the oral traditions of our forefathers into tangible pieces of work that can inform the next generation. True to say, most of these narratives are found spoken under fires in the evenings, and they are considered to be folklore stories. But even until we can begin to consolidate this narrative, we'll constantly be looking at our own epistemologies, evaluating our own culture and our own traditions, using these Western idioms and using these Western frameworks of thinking, to even begin to try and force traditional interpretations of reality into the greater space of Holy Spirit, Bible, Christianity, and church could be considered as what I call intellectual rape. For you are not being honest to the environment itself and allow the historical background to dictate to its own people what it means. Rather, we then fall back on the default of trying to interpret our ancient stories from the Western framework. That gives us already a problem of decolonization and deconstruction. Decolonization in that our narrative must also be decolonized because it is not being spoken in its authenticity. It must be deconstructed in that we are using words that are foreign to the tradition to explain our own tradition. Having said that, however, I must be quick to say the African does not need to be defined through Western idioms, through Western axioms of interpretation, but he needs to interpret it himself from his own language, from his own background and knowledge systems. The Xhosa people were fortunate enough, as much as the Zulus were and the Swazis were. I'll say so because of the following reasons. The prophecies that you received through Ntsikana, there are all other stories being told about Ungawuse and the rest of other prophets. Very pertinent in that the message was clear: take the morality and the teachings of the Bible, but stay away from the money. You may look at the money just as money, but money there was talking to, you'd rather accept the morals, but avoid taking yourself into the economic system of these people. And what do they mean by economics? It meant that our sources of food and our sources of wealth were supposed to be vigilant in how we dealt with the European community in relation to those two items. Unfortunately, when you look at that prophecy, it has come true. Here we are now, all of us trapped in a Eurocentric economic system. And here we are having swallowed the Bible, double poisons on themselves. The Christianity holds our temper, and the economic system holds our strength. And the African people are stuck with a foreign ideology of worship, which does not address their fundamental identity and later on address their fundamental need of economic structures in creating a financial base that allows them to prosper and invest their own investments in things that are visible and tangible, leaving posterity for their children and the generations to come. So you look at that prophecy in itself, even in the modern days, that prophecy could still be well accepted if it is well taught nicely and in correct perspectives. You find that the Swazi people, Sobuza, also had a similar experience where he warned the people, the Swazi people, how they must be careful in dealing with this new white community. He called the Swazi nation together and he asked them to cut their ears. Those who were too literal, they went on to cut their ears physically. But when you go amongst the old people in Swaziland, Actually, what he meant was that Swazis listen and listen very carefully. When a white man is talking to you, cut your ears. Meaning to say, take a knife and cut through all the words that are being spoken. For in the midst of those words, there is lots of deception. And in their own writings, the Europeans will always tell us the devil is in the detail. And because of the Africans' ideology and worldwide view of looking at things, we are not very consistent when it comes to the fine detail. We want to show how beautiful our signatures are on paper. So we are quick to sign before we actually understand or read the context through which the pieces of works are given. If you cross over into the countries such as Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, you'd find the ancestral connections and spiritual revelations coming through people such as Chaminuka, such as Nehanda, who also, in their own frameworks, gave a warning to the African people about the invasion of the European community and how that community will enslave us rather, and push us into poverty, into quarantine, taking away our land, destroying our cattle. And as you know the history very well, Nehanda was then hunted and she was then killed together with Kaguvi, and their heads were decapitated from them. And the British Empire took their heads into Europe. As we speak to this very day, these heads are being used in Buckingham Palace and in other London museums as trophies of war, where people are drinking their wines and champagnes from. History has it that some of them actually cut out the human parts of these stalwarts, and they used them as foundations in building their own castles and their own palaces in the greater European empires. As it were, you understand, therefore, that this issue of spirituality in the African has to do not only with colonization, but actually a takeover and a subjugation of a nation into a religious spectrum and a religious misfunction. Because the things that the African will now do are things that is not related to them, neither does he understand them. The introduction of Jesus in the African context, the introduction of Satan in the African context are two foreign words, etymologically, which don't appear within our greater African context. I know the Xhosas might want to give us a word, umcholi. You're basically trying to describe what he does. But if I ask for his name, Satan, you may just find that some of these epistemologies of expressing religious expressions are totally foreign to the greater African and his way of worship. The African nations have always had a form of spirituality, which is quite deep and fundamental. I would want to highlight two major forms without undermining any. The first one is the one that is coming on the great African migrations. You have the first group of people that are coming through the eastern side, which you mean from South Sudan, into the eastern parts of Guruswa, which is Kenya, Tanganyika, Tanzania, where the world began, parts of Ethiopia, and that group walks down from there, coming down to the south. And you would find these things are preserved well in terms of our culture. As you can see today, I'm putting on a traditional Xhosa hat that is on my head, beaded in Xhosa work. But of course, the hat, I did it myself. But that's the Xhosa beading right there. And back to back with that, you would find, interestingly so, that culture remembers what intellectuals don't seem to remember. You look at the Xhosa fashion statement, you look at the Xhosa hats as you look at them, you would find that prominently on those colors, you find that the white is prominent, the blue is prominent, and the light blue is also prominent. And if you are smart enough, you don't need to go very far, but to Google the greater Jewish or Hebrew cultures and find out that connection between the greater Xhosa tribes and the Hebrew culture in terms of their authenticity. I'm not saying we must force ourselves to become Hebrews. I'm just wanting to show the relationships that people could have started at the same place. On the same wavelength also, one would not miss the Xhosa traditions when it comes to issues of circumcision. And you look into the greater Hebrew culture, that circumcision also becomes a connecting cable. So when you take the two cultures, as an philanthropist or a cultural student, you cannot miss to compare not only the cultural artifacts that a nation is designing to this very date, 2020, and you get into the Jewish culture and you find the cultural practices that are there, and then compare the two cultures and tell me that there's a disparity or there's a difference on the two cultures. We could vary in terms of how we practice them, but the culture remains sacred altogether. In my own world, my small little world where I might want to consolidate information, this goes without saying to say there should have been a common understanding of these kind of traditions and practices, though the nations are far and wide apart. The second group that we need to account for is the movements of the Africans from Embo. And this Embo concept, which is well celebrated in the Xhosa space again, would give us another group of people coming through the western side, that becomes the Congo side, into the Uganda side, dropping down into Zambia and into the greater Zimbabwe, into Mapunguke and the Menemwene Mtapa. You would find that language again remembers what intellectuals don't remember. Because within our language, we are all talking Embo, Embo, Embo. But no one has bothered to find out where is this Embo. Then you would find that the Xhosa nations, Mapata, Amapondo, get into the Zulus, Amapungane, Amazulu, Bongumalo, and you get into the Venda tribes up to date when they talk about Ngomadungundu and how they traveled from Congo following the sound of a drum until they got to the south. So I'm not going to say they moved all at once. Understand that it was like the waves of the sea as the Africans are moving from the cradle of humankind coming down. Two narratives come into space right there. Others would say that no, the cradle of mankind should have been on the south in terms of the greater Khoisan tribes with the cradles of mankind right down here in Johannesburg, the old ancient time clocks that are found in Mpumalanga, and the God's windows and the roundabouts in Mpumalanga, which also have quite an ancient history, which might even go way back into Atlantis and other histories we cannot remember. The whole archive that is found in Benin, the great city, complex as it was, the European still looks at some of these technologies and does not want to admit the African could have such precision in building a city. It could have been some aliens that came from the moons that built these cities. They still have a problem also even with these primitive, sophisticated rocks of Zimbabwe. And they still want to argue that no, Zimbabweans could not have done that in their primitiveness. It should have been some Chinese or some other aliens again who came to build these cities. And the Egyptian pyramids of Giza, including the pyramids of Sudan. In case you did not know, there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt, including the pyramids of Giza and the pyramids of Sudan. Complex civilizations that tell us that Africans were not only technologically inclined, but when you look closely into these artifacts, in terms of their design, you would find that there is a spiritual connection in terms of our architecture. Hence, when you come to the African space, and just for me to show you something quickly, will be when you pick up any piece of an African piece of art, as it were, all around the African continent, from Ghana into Nigeria into Southern Africa, you would find that there is some history and information that is actually coded in our artifacts. In that you would find on these pyramids a clear sign of the pyramids that are facing up and pyramids that are facing down. And then you go back and find out what is this concept of the triangles that is built right here. The great Freemasons and the great Illuminatis have picked up these technologies and have tried and started to build their own civilizations and technologies, financial systems and political systems around this very same knowledge system. And you find that the Egyptian people, the Kemetic knowledge systems that are still written up to this very day in the great pyramids of Giza and beyond, still incubate that these pyramids were not just designed as houses and coffins for the late kings, but they were actually burial sites, and the sites were being used for the greater spiritual connectivity. These were the timetables, the clocks that the human beings, the Africans, had designed on the face of the earth to have a connection with the solar system, calculating the radiuses of the earth and calculating again the movements of the sun and the moon in relationship with the agricultural processes that are being found on the continent and beyond. Therefore, the African knowledge systems, you get into the countries like Mali and Somalia, where you would find that the calendars and the greater history of the griots still encumbers in itself great dates, archaeological and mathematical formulas that up to this very day, even the best universities around the world have not been able to crack. What am I trying to say in one word? That the knowledge systems of the African has always been spiritually connected. Through the African spirituality, the African was able to see and interpret his present in terms of understanding where he is coming, where he is right now. The African was able to look into the future in terms of looking at the seasons, how the birds are flying, how the wind is blowing, how the clouds are moving from the east and to the west, how the animals are behaving, how the trees are behaving. Even in Egypt, they could know how to plow for that year by simply observing the crocodiles. When the crocodiles started laying their eggs, depending where they were laying their eggs, because these animals are older and more ancient, where they placed their eggs will tell the Egyptian where the water level will be that year in terms of plowing. So by simply observing crocodiles' nests, the African was able to understand that you cannot plow this year below that line because you'll be plowing right into the water system. Our observation of nature, therefore, gave us a science and the technology of where we are and where we are going. But what was mostly tempered with our Christian experience, which I regret to mention, was the meddling around and the confusion around our greater ancestral space. Many people, particularly Africans, don't believe that them and their ancestors are one thing. I say so classically clear, to say ancestors are nothing less but you in your previous self. You in your previous self. What does it mean? Is that because before you became you, it was your father who was you. It was your grandfather who was you. It was your great-grandfather who was you. And all of them are now meeting in you. Therefore, every human being who is alive is a connection between the past and the future he is anticipating. Your own children are trapped between your legs in your loins, for you untap the future that you have not yet seen. Therefore, moments of worship and moments of interactions, Ebuhlanti, moments of ancestral connection, were moments of connecting with history. It was a time where Ugogo, Msamo, before she does anything, the first thing that she would do was to relate the history of where you are and where you are coming from. Wena, your name is so and so. On your left, from your mother's side, you are born by so and so. On your mother's side, on your paternal side, you are born by so and so. On your father's side, paternal side, from so and so. On your mother's side, paternal side, so and so. So that the four cardinals, the four grandparents who form the two parents, who form you. You're coming from a whole lineage of four couples, four on the left, four on the right. That make the two, that is your mother and your father. And through that, you become a living human being. And when you look into that genealogy, as it is being related by the old people, this was not meant for worship initially. It's only now, our generation, because of ignorance, we have converted our own ancestors into objects of worship. Initially, this was intended to connect you to where you are coming from. You are son of, born of, so and so who is son of, so and so who is son of, so and so who is son of, son of. And when the Xhosa finishes, then he says, Embo, where it all started, connecting us with the great ancestors who gave birth to us, though we cannot remember who they are. Christianity, that's where to plug in there for that. In the beginning, then God created the heavens and the earth, and Adam and Eve, and the whole story of Western epistemologies start taking its place from there. But within our own culture, had we preserved it long enough, we should have been able as Africans at least to relate 3, 4, 5, 6, 15, 20 generations of where we are coming from. So that in the midst of this, we're able to interact with each other and understand. And in the midst of saying so also, you'd find that as you mentioned these forefathers and as you mentioned these grandfathers, each one of them had a history. I was actually fascinated the other day when I was studying the history of the Somalis and the Malis, the Griotis, how actually they can relate their histories, sometimes 14, 15, 16 centuries backwards, remembering with meticulous detail how and what each one of their forefathers and their kings did. That history becomes an archive of information, a collection of technologies and sciences, a preservation of prophecies, a pronouncement of oracles, contracts that were signed, enmities that were created, relationships that were founded, children that were born, artifacts that were made also. And all this information is preserved in our oral tradition. For now, all we remain having is a piece of art which you may look at and they simply look like colors. But if you look at these colors very carefully, your diet is included in these colors, your spiritual connectivity is in these colors, your history is in these colors, your ancient archives are in these colors, architecture is in these colors. And at the end of the day, it's not just a piece of art, it becomes an object through which you can study into archives. So when you look, amaXhosa, imvunulo yamaSwati, yamaZulu, it's not just about clothes that are seeming to be matching. Look carefully into those artifacts. You may just find that a whole history has been recorded, but because it was not written, it was designed into artifacts. And there is your library. The library of the European is in books. The library of the black man is in the spirit. And those who are able to tap into the spirit, you may just find that your blood and your spirit remembers what your conscious mind may not remember. African spirituality, therefore, is included mostly in our greetings. For today, I want to introduce you to the greetings as I'm closing. Sanibonan, Saubon, Dumelang, Dumelara, Mangwanani, Maneru, Enshamkwai. One fundamental principle you cannot miss in the entire of African greetings. It is the reason that when Africans greet, they don't greet in singular. They always greet in plural. Why are they greeting and why are we greeting each other in plural when I am looking at a singular person? Because the African understands that in his hands, there are 4 families on the left, 4 families on the right that form the 2. And the 2 then forms the 1. So when I am greeting you, I am not greeting you as an individual. I'm greeting you together with izinyanya zakokwenu, abomkhulu bakokwenu, okhokho bakokwenu, ogogo bakokwenu, and all these people who have their DNA running in you. Some of them were kings, some of them were queens, some of them were healers, and etc. Therefore, I cannot greet the individual without recognizing the spirit, the DNA, the ecology, the anthropology, the history that they are carrying with them. Therefore, human beings are never singular. And all of us as Africans, none amongst us has one totem. We all have 4 totems in us. 2 paternal, 2 maternal, making 2 a couple makes 1. So we have 4 roots, 4 major roots that connect us to ourselves. African spirituality understood the connectivity you have with the 4 roots that are all flowing into you. This becomes your compass, African child. This becomes your compass that will tell you where your north is. It will tell you where your east is. It will tell you where your south is. It will tell you where the west is. And an African who does not have his compass will always be roving on the seas of life, swept away by all forms of religion. The capturing of the African child was not only an economic capture, it was also a spiritual capture. And by removing the African from his roots, you were able to transport them as a potted plant, which can only be restricted by the extent at which the roots can be expanded. No tree can grow beyond the limitations of its own roots. No house can stand unless the foundation is strong. The value of African spirituality was the connectivity of the African. Firstly, before you can connect with your God, you needed to connect with yourself through your forefathers, through your ancestry, and your ancestry, which is a summary of you in the past. Knowledge systems that are growing and living in you became your access into your greater space of spirituality. Tampering with these roots meant removing African from his greater connection. All our entire Christian experiences in the 21st century becomes a facade, a pretense, becomes a hypocritical process where the African is trying to trace his God through Western languages. And the more we talk about it, the more confused we become. Because Jesus himself, when he is born, Matthew chapter 1, son of Joseph, son of 14 generations are listed for us. Why is it important that the Messiah can preserve his own history, but the African can throw away his own history? Before you become a Christian, Christianity expects you and washes you away from your culture so that it makes you become part of the European culture. Therefore, Christianity as we have it, it cannot be a form of spirituality, but a form of colonialism, where basically you are taking away a people from themselves to a superior and a dominant culture. And in the dominant culture, they become twice slaves. Slaves to the economic masters and slaves to the spiritual bosses. And the white man trying to look like the Jesus he is selling, it makes the white man a cousin of the master. And the African cannot kill the white man because he is related to the boss who is paying the bills. Spirituality controls our economics. Spirituality controls our politics. When you lose the battle with your gods, you have lost the battle with your enemies. Thank you.
Thanks, Bishop. That was quite a comprehensive and eye-opening reflection and lecture about African spiritualism within the Xhosa context and far beyond into Africa. I'm sure we have taken some notes, and I've asked people to raise their hand. I see one, and some to use the comment box, the chat box, for some of the questions that I can read out loud. So let me, without wasting time, take the first hand that I see is up by Yem. I will unmute you, and I think you've unmuted yourself. Yem Bomoy, you can come in.
Okay, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, Bishop, thanks very much for this enlightenment. One thing which is a fact, which I think in this age, particularly in the past 5 years, which I have observed and have received an enlightenment on, is that we have a colonized Christianity. Our Christianity is highly colonized, and we find ourselves in that. I am saying that without fear or favor. However, Christ himself is not a colonial being. But when colonialists came to us, they took our land, they took our economy, they took our mindset, and they even took, actually, they would have been fools if they would not have taken our spirituality, which is believing the way we're doing. However, the point I want to make in what Mfundisi has said, which I also agree with him, this colonialized Christianity has even made us to be too individualistic, which is highly un-African. And I would like him to comment, because I also believe that particularly African Christians need to be restored back into Ubuntu, because you can never be a Christian without having Ubuntu. Right now, we're getting Christians who are so loud, who are so big, yet not having Ubuntu, which is a worse form of where we're seeing this decolonization from the African spirituality, which take us then to Europe. Because if you look into the Jewish system was intact. There was a huge, strong connection between their spirituality, between their land, the land ownership, between their society, and also between their economy. You can never, but we as Africans, we are highly disintegrated. And I would like Bishop to comment on that.
Okay, thank you so much for those inputs. Let me take 2 or 3 more hands, Bishop, before you respond. I see, before I take how we made 20 light, there's a text first that is asking that, Bishop, can you tell us the issue of when we started worshiping ancestors instead of learning the lessons that you were saying we can learn from acknowledging them and understanding that history and heritage. So when did the transition take place, or how did it take place, where now we worship ancestors instead of worshiping God or knowing God through our ancestors? That was in the text, the group chat. And then I'll unmute Hawaii here, and then you can go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. The Bishop has touched on various aspects that I myself have already started actually. Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I'll just
Okay.
unmute this person. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, venturing into in terms of the great migration of the Bantus in waves, like he alluded that we migrated in waves southwards. And actually in terms of our culture, which I see most of that in that book that is written there, especially in the Torah, which our spirituality is very distinct actually, and what these people did, they actually took the truth and twisted it. It is easy to take the truth and twist the truth. Sorry. And in order to colonize us, took our deity and paint him white. Like he said that now by painting our deity white, now we see these people. We even call them Abelungu, which Mungu Mulungu means a god. We even call them Abelungu. And now eventually colonize us. When we see them, we see a god. So then now we like to thank the Bishop for actually these teachings. This is great, and actually for terrifying most of those things in terms of the greater Embu. Hence we have tribes like Ovambu, Embu as well in Kenya. Those are the Bena Congo as well, Congolese. And most people here don't know, especially the Nguni people, that we actually Bakongo. So we like to thank you very much, Bishop. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for those inputs. We'll take the last hand, and then Bishop can respond to this round. I see the hand of Mlamli. I'll unmute you. Oh, you are unmuted. You can go ahead. Mlamli, you can go ahead. Okay, Mlamli is not connecting. Kabelo, let me unmute you. Yes, go ahead, Kabelo. You are muted, Kabelo. We can't hear you. Okay, Bishop, can you respond to this first round? Maybe we'll wait for them to connect properly.
Okay. I think I'll work backwards so that we can cover grounds. The first one, let's from today onwards, let's use the correct words to call Abelungu. Let's use the correct words. Our forefathers never called them Abelungu. There's a Xhosa word or Zulu word about ukulomba. Ukulomba. It's when one person walks to another person and they are not of the same culture and they want to usurp power from that culture or from that family. It's witchcraft. It's sorcery. Their real name is not Abelungu. Abelombi. Abelumbi. ultimately it was now they were called Abelungu. But their original name, if you go back into your archives, you find that initially they were called Abelombi, Abalombi, Abelumbi, and which we now call Abelungu. So simply meaning white traditions and white culture is actually sorcery. Sorcery which has bewitched the African to even forget his name, forget his history, forget his wealth, and forget his land. And with that in mind, we need to understand that we are under a spell of dark witchcraft, where our minds cannot think as Africans because our tongues are full of sugar and our tongues are full of plastic foods. Secondly, I would respond then to the transition between recognizing our ancestors and worshiping them. Missionaries came together with mercenaries, two group of people that came together and were working together. Missionaries and mercenaries. Missionaries would always come ahead to hypnotize, to get the people into one group and get them as missionaries, to get them to cool down first and detox them of being barbaric. And then the mercenaries would follow with the business agenda. It was a well thought through plan. Missionaries and mercenaries, they had tea together in the evening to discuss the strategies of how work was happening amongst the black people as they were colonizing them. We cannot refuse in the 21st century that Christianity worked together with colonialism. I know some of us are deep into it. It is difficult for you to look at something that you love. This knife pierces you hard. It has cut you so many times, but you cannot just put it away. You love it. So, but let's address it candidly so that you can begin a journey of self-awakening. That Christianity, as it came through the colonial system, the intentions were not pure intentions of introducing the African to God. The intentions were clear, as of using Christianity as a catchment area, as a cleanup center, as a preparation area for the colonial system. So immediately the missionary demonized your forefathers as demons. What else can you expect? The transition again we find when we say we worship ancestors. That language on its own, it is colonial language. For we have never worshipped ancestors as Africans. We have always mentioned them and recognized them. When we finish up, we say Kamat, we say Mvelingang, we say Nkulunkul. We always end up giving the worship to where it belongs. And this whole business of worship, I personally don't understand it also. Are you telling me that deity is has such a low self-esteem that it needs to be worshipped by human beings? You have a whole God who is in heaven, who has angels and everything else. And the only thing that he lives on is to be worshipped by people. In my own mind, small little as it is, if your God demands you to worship him, then he has a terrible self-esteem. Correct worship is when a king puts his crown in front of another king. Equals must work together and work in harmony. Then that's dignity of the African people. The religion that makes the African kneel down and bow and lie on his ground in front of the pastor and in front of the white man only colonizes the mind and reduces the royalty in you to the slave that is in you. Such a religion has never been part of Africa. The African would bow and kneel in front of his forefathers, recognizing that they were older than him and they brought him into existence as they link him up with God. But this modern form of entertain that much further than that. The last one, the Christianity is a bully to African culture. It is a bully to African culture, for it bullies our weddings. It bullies our respect systems. It bullies our wealth systems. It bullies everything. In fact, the first bus stop of Christianity is to make sure that you look like a European before Jesus can accept you. You must put away everything that is Xhosa, from your food to your diet to your clothes, everything. Remove everything that is African. And then when you've removed everything, then we must baptize you as if we are giving birth to you afresh with a new identity. And in some cases of the past, when you're being baptized, then your name must be taken away. What's your name? Mandlenkos. That's not Christian enough. Your name is now Mark. Can you tell me if you are thinking and your head is working? Mandlenkos is not a Christian name, but Mark is a Christian name. Mandlenkos means the power of God. So how would the African even have his own name changed from a spiritual name to a Eurocentric, Jewish-centered name? Colonialism is a reality. We are all, let's agree, We are all addicts of Christianity who are in rehabilitation. We are all in the recovery center.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Bishop, for those reflections. I'll read some of the questions on the group chat and then take the last hands. And then in your response, you will also provide the concluding remarks. And then we'll have our poll just to get some feedback from our audience today in order to improve the next session. I've already seen texts that say we need to upload this on YouTube so that it can be accessible. So one question here on the chat box is from Kaya. He's saying, isn't this plurality that Bishop is talking about a basis for understanding the concept of Trinity? Is it possible that those who introduced the three gods got confused with the plurality as understood by Africans? That is the first question. And then Ulele Williams is saying, as we all know that Nongause prayed to Kamata, which is a proper African pathway, are we to utilize as Abantu in praying and connecting with God that were used in ancient times? So are we to use Abantu in praying and connecting to God as it was done in ancient times? That's another question. Let me see if there's another question here. Okay, this one is a response to the non-answer question, so I won't ask it. So this one is saying, in 2020, who is colonizing us now? That is Dr. Zakari. Who is colonizing us now in 2020? And then Benny has a hand. I'll take your hand now, Benny. Let me just finish here. This one says, okay, I've lost this comment now. Oh, Yem has another question. You'll go after Benny. So Benny, go ahead with your question. I think Vianney as well has a question. So it will be Benny, Yem, and Uvuyani. Thanks. In that
Sunday. Wait, how much?
Please mute your mic. So Benny.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Bishop Maponga. Indeed, when I'm listening to this presentation, we are people, torn between two worlds, trying to assert our Africanness and also finding ourselves being, drawn towards Europeanism. But you mentioned, Bishop, when the arrival of the missionaries and how they worked together with the colonialists and made a fertile ground for the colonialists to marginalize and to overcome us in our culture, which is the African culture. But the question that I want to ask, you have Ethiopia, where it is said that way before colonialism came into Africa, Christianity was through the people who followed Christ disciples from the East, not from the West. So what I would like to ask is, how does Christianity, the one that was not preached by missionaries, manifest itself in a culture that was not colonized, and in comparison to the culture that was colonized? So I want to check back, because we do have Christianity there, we do have it here, but I think people who propagated or who delivered these messages were different people who maybe who can say they have different motives. But how does Christianity then manifest itself in Ethiopia and as compared to how it manifests? Hopefully you understand me, Bishop.
Yes, captured, Benny. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Vianney.
One Bishop, my question is very simple, there are staunch Africans out there who completely refuse to accept that there's God out there. Now, as a pastor, if you were to ask to go and preach there, would you accept the invitation? And if your answer is yes, please elaborate. Why would you accept to go and preach to that congregation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take Uyemyem, then I see Mangaliso as well after Uyemyem. Enkosi kakhulu, Tatu Vianney.
Okay, thanks so much. Just to start, I'm not the bishop, but just to start with Upravid, what he has said. Atheism is foreign in Africa. I don't think there's any African who does not recognize the presence of God. However, he put it, but Africans believe there's a big theological well in a God who is not from within. And that I've never seen that unless in the modern era. One thing I wanted to correct with Umfundi or Bishop, which I disagree with him, is that colonialists and missionaries were working together. Anyway, he has not even answered my question with Ubuntu and Christianity. I would like him to answer that. Let me give why I'm saying I disagree with that, particularly in the South African context, based on history. Jan van Riebeeck of Vasco da Gama arrives before 14. Jan van Riebeeck arrives in 1652. It took more than 200 years, even for Africans to be evangelized. When the missionaries came in here, even they themselves, amongst themselves, had problems. Should we have a settler church, or should we evangelize Africans? So that some of them even said, look, Africans are barbarians, are closer to the devil. These things can never accept Christ, can never receive Christ. Therefore, let's not do that. And then it took a very long time, even within themselves. But it had to take off on the camp who had to come into the African, who were very bold and said, guys, we've been sent by the mission of Christ that we need to evangelize Africans. And often the camp started to make some inroads. But it is not that they were, okay, this is how they were working together. It is not that missionaries were used to send first to appease Africans, but missionaries, they themselves, they took that stand, some of them consciously so to evangelize us. However, I also know that in evangelism of the missionaries which came to Africans, it was also colonized, some of them. There was also some colonial mentality, but the fact of the matter is that it took more than 200 years for Africans to be evangelized by the white missionaries. And lastly, the point I want to make is that, which I also agree with Bishop, that let me start in the Adventist fraternity, that in Adventism, which I've experienced, African thought is not accommodated anywhere. And I don't think it is that, whether by default or whatsoever, there is no African space, there is no place for African. Here, you must be transported as an African into an American way of thinking, which I think it is unChristly. And please go to this in my funeral, Oppo. I think you will be there, that I've said it, and it is like that.
Okay, thank you so much for that passionate contribution. Our last hand is Mangaliso. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to ask a question. There's a question that was written by Ungasana, but you skipped in mentioning it. Okay. It says, what do you mean by Christianity, Bishop? Because in my understanding, Christianity is about following Christ, and Christ is here to save the world. So what do you mean by Christianity? And I think that's the basic question. What do you mean by Christianity, it being a bully, whereas it's all about following Christ, and Christ says that we should bring people towards Him.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just the last questions, Bishop, on the chat box. This one says from Luvuyo Nzuzo, how much land did churches acquire from our forefathers? Kamata, please accept that missionaries worked in favor of coloniality, or maybe it's saying, did Kamata accept that missionaries worked in favor of coloniality? And then this one says, can Pastor Maponga assist to reconcile or clarify the difference between religion that came from North Africa to a religion that came from the boat? I think those were the last questions. And then before now Bishop comes in, actually the webinar for in June will be looking at the arrival of missionaries and the whole missionary project. So
I don't know.
we cannot go deep in that. We will definitely do that next month when we have that webinar. Over to you, Bishop. You can unmute yourself, Bishop.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Hello.
I can hear you now.
On the top of the program, we're not here to run a debate. We're like prisoners who are busy arguing how comfortable is the prison. I don't have energy for that. The reality is whether Christianity participated or did not participate. The question is, did it condemn vehemently? To date, the same church he's talking about is divided between blacks and whites. To date, there's Adventist church. So you must be very careful not to take his guns and start shooting. He might end up shooting himself. There's some people who came 200 years earlier who would be naive to think that they did not come having been instructed by the Anglo-Saxons, the Queen of London, and they did not have the blessings of their own preachers and pastors and bishops who came part of the cruise, as it were. Whether they ministered to them only or not is another story, but you have a colonial system that has been driven by the Queen and other monarchs who in themselves are a religious organization. And by the time the missionaries arrive here, they don't do less than what the colonizers were doing. So I'm not here to protect the colonialists by any strand of hair on my head. I have enough problems of my own than protecting a person who has abused another. And secondly, the two religions that you're talking about, I think it would be nicer if you had a full study. I'll just give you in highlights. For those of you who are going to study, I won't have enough time to explain everything in another. It may need another lecture altogether. There are 4 types of Christianities that we may need to look at. The first one is what I might want to call the Messianic Christianity, which has its roots in Judaism and Hebraic faiths. The next one will be the Ethiopian, which has its roots in the Ethiopian eunuch and the relationships of Solomon and Bathsheba, which affects then the history of the Ethiopians. The third one is what I might want to call the Romanism, where pagan Rome became papal Rome and configured the whole world for 1,260 years as papal Rome, to have its entrenchment of Romanism in terms of culture embedded and married together with Christianity to form the great Catholicism. And from Catholicism, a breakaway of all the European religions as you have them, from Anglicans to Presbyterians to Episcopals and etc. The last group then comes the Reformation Christianity, which has its main roots again from the reformers who are reforming and protesting, Protestants. That's why the word Protestant comes from, who are protesting Romanism in their own various cultures. And then you have the beginning of Calvin, Zwingli's, and the rest of them, including the Adventist Church and other churches. So the last one, which is the American or the European, moved into Europe to become a new form of Christianity. And through the two groups, the European and the American, the missionary journey begins. And as missionaries came here, they did not come here to preach Jesus. Please stop wasting my time. They came here looking for new financial fields. They were coming here to look for new retirement homes for themselves. They were coming here to plunder, because as much as they were preaching, they were busy digging for diamonds. Adventism arrived here, not anywhere else, but in Kimberley, to dig diamonds. So you don't get confused and get twisted because you like something. Address it candidly, then you can have it in its correct perspective. Question number 2, the plurality of Trinity. Trinity becomes a conversation that takes place in 321 to 326 and beyond on the Great Council of Nicene. And the greater teachings of the Trinity, you may want to go back into Kemetic religion and ask yourself the question, is Trinity a teaching of the Bible, or Trinity is a Kemetic Egyptian kind of teaching? The Bible does not teach the Trinity. It teaches monotheism. Hear ye, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. The whole concept of arguing the plurality of God is not together Hebraic, is not together biblical, so to speak. We're trying to force pagan, we're trying to force Romanism, we're trying to force Kemetic knowledge into the biblical space. And I find that to be a bit appalling. It is not worth mentioning. And in our African space, we don't have that kind of Trinitarian argument of trying to argue 3 gods in one. And then you ask, are they 3? No, they are not 3. It is 1 in 3. What are you saying? No, it's one who divides himself into 3. So are they 3? No, they are not 3. Each one of them is God, but they are not gods. I think there's too much mathematics in that whole Trinity gospel. I would rather spend my mind on something that is more profitable. Connecting with Kamata, connecting with the God that we know. Very beautiful point that you mentioned right there, that the European did not bring God to Africa. God was already here in all his forms, and we relate to him in the way in which we know him. Therefore, relating to Kamata, Mvelingange, Nkulunkulu, and everything else, I don't find that to be in conflict with your greater understanding of the African himself, knowing who this God is. And we give things, names to gods and people because of the experiences that we've had with those people. So when your people are calling him Kamata Mvelingange, the experience they have is that of Mvelingange. And you will be a fool to undermine that history, which tradition is preserved in a name. Because the name tells you we have met this person or we've met this deity, and this is what we've deduced from him, and we have named him thus. You get to Zambezi, they call him Musi Tunya, the smoke that thunders, and there is Zame de Nyame, the great snake who causes it to rain. The experience the Tongas have had with their God has been in the rains and the rainbows of the Zimbabwe Falls, Victoria Falls, Musi Tunya. So each family, each tribe, each nation has had its own interaction. And if you get him on a Christian platform, then I'll tell you it is God, it is Yahweh, it is Mvelingange who placed us all on the faces of the earth so that all of us can seek for him diligently, though he is not far from any one of us. I would not stop anyone who wants to pray calling on God using his own traditional languages. I don't know how you pray right now. You say Mvelingange Nkulunkulu help me but mawusiyovala ke ngegama lika Jesu siyathandaza amen umosha umthandazo wonke. Why must it end up in Jesus' name when you were talking to the Father to start with? You know, then colonialism in itself and its pastors has never been friendly to the African people. We cannot undermine that. It's a fact that we need to put on record again. And the pastors who go through the schools and the training, they can only come back to tell us what the missionaries and the colonialists have told them. It's a well-oiled system that manages Africans not to revolt against colonialism. And the other question, atheism, yeah, look, atheism, people are taught to become atheists. If you are brought up in a traditional indigenous environment, you are introduced to the diet, the food, and the gods of that culture. For you to abandon that and say, I don't believe in anything now, don't waste my time again. You believe in something. Just tell us what you believe in. Whether it is a tree, it's yourself, it's your wind, but it is impossible. There's an emptiness in the human spirit that cannot be filled by food or sex or anything else. It is filled by spiritual connection. And how you achieve that, that could be your own project. And the other question, what do you mean by Christianity? I think I've already put that on the top side. I tried to combine all your answers. I've already tried to put that on the top side, that Christianity as we have it, we have what we call Eurocentric Christianity. We have what we call Roman-based Christianity. We have Ethiopian Christianity, which is also in its Orthodox Church. We have Jewish Messianic Christianity, and then we have Judaism itself as a function. And so there are various forms of expression So before you say you are a Christian, you may want to start finding out, are you which type of a Christian are you? And only recently, as of the last 100 years or 80 years or so, if we begin to see the coming up of African churches. But even when these African churches are coming, they're not coming together all together as Africans. They still have elements again of the same Jewish, the same European, the same Romanism, a bit of the Ethiopian. I could allow the Ethiopians because they are our brothers. But when it comes to expressing ourselves spirituality, we needed to be truthful to our own environments. Then we don't become idols to other people's gods.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm about to close.
Can you point me, sir, please? My hand has been up for too long.
Oh, go in, Dad.
Okay, thank you for pointing me. Yeah, let me take a big breath before sharing what I'm going to share. I've got a question which says, is there anything in the Bible that is colonized which must be decolonized? If yes, which parts of the Bible are colonized and must be decolonized? And just to make some 3 points to Bishop, and I'm saying this from a biblical point of view. I'm not sure where Bishop is standing, whether he can come out that this is an Afro-Christiano, blah, blah, blah standpoint religiously. I don't know where he stands. I don't know the references of what he says. And I'm saying what I'm saying using the Bible as a reference. What is sharing to us is fallacy when it destroys Christianity, Trinity, and jumps on and only picks on Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, where he says, "Hello, Shema Israel, Adonai Elohim, Adonai Akkad." That word Israelites were talking to God as there is one God. There are also a plethora of verses about the plurality of God, and he is very selective when he picks that and destroys Trinity. Holy Spirit is saying that we should not even close our prayers with Jesus. My last point to make to Bishop is, when missionaries came here, there were missionaries that were converted, that were God-fearing. There were also missionaries that were not converted, that were partnering with mercenaries. And he must not make a mistake of rubbishing all of them because it differs with them. For instance, you say when Adventists went to Kimberley, they were all after gold. That's not true. And please, Bishop, what you differ with, what you don't like, don't demonize it. And this is a mistake we did when I was a PAC member, where we thought that all white people are mercenaries, are settlers, they must be killed. Whilst we couldn't answer when there were white people who were pro-black people, who were against what the white people were doing, who were chased away by and called by many names by other whites as well. And that is wrong. And as much as we might not like white people, as much as we might not like colonialists, we must also acknowledge that there are those that are having a good heart, that are God-sent. But my main question to Bishop is, what part of the Bible is colonized and how should we decolonize it? That's my question. Can I answer on the part of the Bible which is colonized and which needs to be decolonized?
Okay, sorry, we are running out of time. Unless I can't take the interview.
No, give him a chance. Give him a chance. It's fine.
Go ahead.
Okay. Look, I agree with Upanda, as my brother just asked a question. The Xhosa Bible, when it was interpreted by the mission to us, there is a verse where Paul says, "I have fought a good fight, and now what is waiting for me is the crown of life." The colonialists, which influenced these unconverted missionaries, said, "You know what? These Xhosa people are very brave. They have fought many wars. They are fighting. They are a fighting people. And let's not put this verse according to what it says." And hence, when it goes to isiXhosa, it says, "Umzamo omhle wokholo ndiwuzamile." Yet Paul is talking about fight, because they saw that if ever we put fight into these people while we try to stymie them and desensitize them and whatsoever thing, it will arouse their fighting spirit. That verse, I'm just quoting on that verse needs to be decolored because colonialists were very mischievous when they were interpreting that verse. That is the one I can give you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Let me comment quickly to my friend here. I didn't want to, I was invited here not to present a theological paper. And as Kamata rightfully puts it, he goes, I don't know where the bishop is standing, blah, 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 blah. Okay, if I'm standing on blah, 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 then I have nothing much I can say to you, sir. I was invited here to make a commentary on African spirituality, and I've tried to be truthful to my brief. If you want me to come and present on a Christian Adventist platform, please, I would suggest that you also make time to do that. On the firstly, maybe let me just give you one small brief one to assist you in your Christian growth also. You must take your same Bible. When you say which part is colonized, you must take your Bible as a Christian and then begin to answer the following questions. Begin to confront the issue of land using your Bible. Let me see if you can implement the laws of Deuteronomy. The entire Bible has principles that the church does not believe in at all. Right now, if I talk about land, the quickest thing you do is to tell me you're waiting for the second coming of Jesus because the land, your land is in the heavens. Because theology is able to control behavior. The quicker you accept that, the faster you break away from that cocoon, which locks you up to think that missionaries somewhere, some are. I'm not here to be doing a census of what we are discussing, the project in its totality. Because even in its function right now, Christianity has not shown us a different picture to what the mercenaries and the missionaries came to achieve. Having said that, however, we needed to be very careful that in the midst of the obsession with the missionaries, we don't demonize ourselves and consider ourselves as second-class readers of the text. Because once we do that, we are twice as slaves. Firstly, to those who have become missionaries of us, and secondly, to the God that they're introducing to us. If ever we wanted to understand that passage, where it says, slaves, obey your masters, an African must pick up that verse and read it to a white man. And he, the black man, must become the master. And the foreigner and the stranger must become the slave. Let's see if the same Christianity you're talking about will become palatable when you read it to your white missionaries, whom you say they are not as evil. You will not have to waste your time. The reality is, this Christianity we have now has races which have been cascaded in their levels of superiority. And the white person, the European person, still considers himself superior, even in the midst of the religion that he proclaims is non-sexist, non-religious, all races are equal. We know to date that it is not true, even in the Christian church, that races are not equal. That's for a fact. Tell me when in the Adventist church are you going to have a black president running the church? In as much as you love it, for years over. Right now, Africa is the largest population of Adventists, and Brazil, all black. But why is it that it's still being run by white people? When are you going to move your GC to Africa, where the greatest population are? When your policy says the General Conference must be where the greatest constituency is. If you want me to quote your policy, I think it's another conversation on another platform. For the purposes and the sake of those who are here from other places, let's allow the conversation to remain within us appreciating a greater, closer tradition, how God has revealed himself, how Kamata Nkulunkulu has revealed himself. And it's actually even bad that your name is such a big name, Kamata, and yet you speak totally from the hands. You know, it looks like you're putting on your hands are something else, and your voice. I did not disturb you when you're talking. You wait. You are having the hands of Esau, but your voice is the voice of Jacob. With a beautiful name like Kamata, you should have been the propagator, knowing that your forefathers were the custodian of this knowledge. I'm a foreigner here. I'm from Zimbabwe. Here I am trying to stand and protect and speak for the Xhosa culture. And to have a Kamata, a Xhosa, shooting at me as a Zimbabwean who is trying to promote Xhosa tradition, which is your own forefathers and your own history, I don't think I can help you. You are beyond the reach of my hands. May the lords of the Xhosa.
Hallelujah.
Okay, thanks, Bishop, for that input. I think we have come to the end of today's conversation. I know we're starting to warm up, but I think we've exhausted our time for today. Actually, the purpose of this webinar was to 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 stimulate the conversations, to get us to start talking, to start thinking critically and about what we believe in and about who we are. So obviously today we were not going to exhaust everything, and we are not debating, we are having a conversation. So it's not about I'm right, you're wrong, but it's about co-learning and helping each other to grow. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone that came through and that would be viewing this video even later after this session. And many other thanks to Bishop for agreeing to join us today, and also to empty some of the knowledge he has in his library and to spend his time with us. It's a weekend. He could have been doing something else. And also to thank the audience for your behavior. Although towards the end we got a bit heated, but that is the nature of these conversations. But let me also say that we were using Ntsikana, his experience as a springboard to enter into such conversations. We learned also that culture does not forget, language remembers, and there is embedded meaning in our architect, in our art, and Africans are not singular, but like this concept of nuclear families and individualism, but we are communal beings, and also Bishop talked about the prophecy of Ntsikana, relating it to economics, that the African economy has been subdued by the colonial economy. We have seen that the embarrassment and the shame and the indignity that has been happening around the COVID-19, where Black people are in lines waiting for handouts, but they are in their own country and spaces, and even Christians are among those people. So we have a lot to go back and think about. But I would like to challenge each and everyone that has joined today to go back to read, to go back to self-critique before we critique what other people are saying. But let us go back and relearn what we have been taught, with improved perspectives. And hopefully at some point, maybe early next year, we can have a conference together where we can deliberate on these issues face to face after the COVID-19. And then before we go to the poll, I'd like to also invite you to our session next month, which will be focusing on the arrival of missionaries in Southern Africa and the whole missionaries project. So we'll be going deeper into that. And then at a future date, we will also be looking at the theology that the missionaries were using in missionarizing us. I also must say this, that the audience here is not purely an Adventist audience. It is open to everyone. So this is not a program for Adventists. It's a program for everyone, for every Christian, for every African, for every human being who is interested in this dialogue. So thank you so much for your time. And I was asked to play the Ntsikana song that people missed out when we were starting. So I'm reading your comments on the chat box. They are much appreciated. And please add some suggestions on the comment box, on the chat, on the group chat, of how we can improve or who we can invite on these webinars to improve our conversations. And I hope we all had a learning encounter. Thank you so much. So I'll just play the music now. And
can we pray, please, in closing this? Sorry to disturb. Just a word of prayer. Is it possible?
okay, we will close with the word of prayer after the poll. It's fine. Okay, thank you. Let me post the poll for you while I'm playing the song. Oh, oh, oh.